we defined a market equilibrium as giving us the price and quantity at which demand equals supply. And it defines the only price where what households want to buy is matched by what sellers want to supply. That is, of course, ceteris paribus. Now, what about depicting market situations where surpluses and shortages occur? Let's take a price above the equilibrium, in this case about $4.50, and you can see that in this situation we have a surplus. You can see here the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, and so there's about 6 units surplus at the price of $4.50. At a price below equilibrium, we get a shortage. As you can see here, the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied by that distance. In other words, at $2, there's roughly 6 units of shortage. What will happen when this occurs? And in fact, how does it occur? Because it doesn't appear that we could ever have that situation where the wishes of consumers and the wishes of suppliers were out of kilter like that. Well, it happens when there are shifts in the demand or supply curves which disrupt the original equilibrium. And fortunately, most markets are stable. In other words, there will occur market mechanisms that ultimately ensure that any new equilibrium is reattained at a new price and quantity. As an example of this, I have found a news article from this website which describes the circumstances for a price drop in vegetable prices. The article argues that because of strong rainfalls and pressures on local growers to dump vegetables on the market because of a lack of demand for them foreigners, we arrive at this low price situation. So let's use a graph to describe what's happening here. In this case, let's imagine that we're talking about the quantity of cabbages. There's an equilibrium price of $3 and 7,000 cabbages cleared in this market with an equilibrium position at point E. So now, the supply curve shifts according to the article because of these substantial harvests and the oversupply. Now, quite clearly, supply curve SS, the original supply curve, is no longer relevant, so we can get rid of that. But of course, the price level is still $3. So at that price, you can see there's an excess supply equal to the distance EB. It's a greater supply than demand at $3. Is this something that could stay on? Is it something that could maintain into the future? Well, no, because when there's that surplus, cabbage growers will want to get rid of the excess and they'll be prepared to lower their prices to get rid of the surplus. And as prices fall, so buyers become more keen to purchase because there's this inverse relationship moving down the demand curve from E to E prime. And eventually that surplus will diminish down to nothing and the market will re-establish at E prime. Notice as well that there is an implication that prices will ultimately lead to reallocation of resources. The farmer's going to get more trucks and things like that to get the cabbage to the market, for instance. So market prices act as a signal for this reallocation. Let's take another example of a surplus, but in this case, it's produced by a fall in demand. Let's say we're talking here about the export market for coal. And let's imagine that a world recession has shifted the demand curve for coal to the left. Less electricity is needed because production is down in the world, and so less coal. So now what this does is it also creates a surplus equal to the distance BE. So D, in fact, is no longer really relevant. I haven't eliminated in this slide, but you can see that there is the surplus equal to BE. Now again, there will be mechanisms in the market which will re-establish equilibrium. The Australian mines will try to reduce the surplus by being prepared to drop their prices, whereas the consumers or buyers of market will be inclined to buy more as the price falls. E prime is the final equilibrium where what suppliers are prepared to supply matches what demanders are willing to demand. And again, there are implications for the reallocation of resources. What about shortages? Well, a shortage can be caused by an increase in demand. Let's say here we have an example of the share market. Woolworths shares are being traded, let's say. And let's say there's a report out which paints Woolworths in a good light, and so people think, oh, it's going to do better in the future. So they are keen. The shift to the right has been caused by them a keenness to purchase Woolworths shares. So now this was the original equilibrium at E, and at E, when the demand curve shifts to D prime, you get a market shortage equal to the distance EB, which starts up these mechanisms. The higher share price will deter some purchases of shares, whereas the higher price will induce some investors to actually sell their shares because they expect to make some profit from doing so. Eventually, E prime becomes equilibrium, shares settle at that higher price. And then we may have a shortage occurring because of a decrease in supply. This may be, for instance, the market for wine, poor grape harvest, less wine around. This creates a shift to the left of the supply curve for wine. Shortage again of BE. Again, mechanisms, higher prices will deter wine purchases by consumers, whereas the higher price will induce some producers to put more wine on the market. They, for instance, may import wine, as the prices rise, or they may shorten the vintage process and get some wines onto the market a little earlier than they had initially anticipated. And eventually the market settles at a higher price for wine, and again there are resource allocation implications of that shift. Okay, so what can we conclude from this? Well, firstly, an equilibrium is stable. In other words, once there's a disturbance, it causes a shift of either the demand or the supply curves. This will result in a surplus or a shortage at the pre-disturbance price, and that will put into train changes in prices which move consumers and suppliers along their respective curves and eventually brings the market back into equilibrium. So that's what we mean by stability. A disequilibrium situation will result in moving back towards a new equilibrium. And of course, when the quantity traded changes because of this change in equilibrium, we know that land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are relocated within the economy. Market systems are the way, these automatic systems within the market are the way in which that reallocation takes place.